Hello, and thank you for joining me. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the history of the Christmas tree tradition. So many of us who celebrate Christmas each year decorate either an artificial or a real tree for Christmas time. Christmas trees have a long history. Many of us have heard that the decorating of trees began with pagans in Europe. While the tree decorating traditions we are more familiar with today did originate with European pagans, likely in the 4th century, many other cultural groups practiced a similar tradition. The European pagans, who were people who held beliefs other than the main world religions, used branches of fir, pine, and spruce trees to decorate their homes during the winter time in celebration of the winter solstice. Some groups would hang the boughs of these trees over their windows and doors, as they believed that it would ward off bad spirits. The ancient Egyptians believed in a god called Ra. In celebration of Ra recovering from an illness, according to ancient Egyptian mythology, the Egyptians would use green palm rushes to decorate their homes during the solstice. The Romans also had a tradition to mark the solstice. Each year, they held a feast called Saturnalia to honor Saturn, the god of agriculture. They used evergreen branches to decorate their homes for the feast, to represent a new season of growth. The Christmas tree tradition that we practice today, which is bringing a tree into our homes and lighting it up, is believed to have begun in Germany in the 1500s. Christians would bring trees into their homes to decorate, sometimes using candles to add light. Due to the pagan influence, Christmas trees were not popularized until around 1850. German settlers brought the tradition to North America, but non-German Christians frowned on the tradition. In fact, decorating trees at Christmas time was banned and made illegal in some places, like in Massachusetts in the mid-1600s. It wasn't until the British royal family decorated their tree that it was accepted by the general population in Europe and North America. Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, was German by birth. In 1846, he and his family took part in the German tradition of decorating a tree for Christmas and had an artist sketch the occasion. He also had decorated Christmas trees sent to local schools and army barracks. Once people saw the sketch of the royals' tree, the trend caught on. By the 1890s, Christmas ornaments made in Germany were being sent to Europe and North America as they were in high demand. So nowadays, we're used to giving gifts in a different way than the Victorians did originally. What we do now is place our Christmas gifts under the Christmas tree and open them Christmas morning. But originally, exchanging gifts took place in the New Year. But as Christmas grew in importance and popularity, the Victorians moved the tradition to Christmas time. In the late 1800s, gifts for most families who did not have a lot of money would have been quite simple. Things like fruit, nuts, candy, and homemade cookies were exchanged, and small homemade toys made out of things like wood and yarn were given to children. Usually the gifts were placed on the Christmas trees themselves. Receiving an orange for Christmas was an extra special gift because they were quite expensive, as they had to be shipped from warmer climates where they were grown. Wealthier families would exchange more elaborate and expensive gifts. Men may receive a scarf or fancy leather suspenders, perhaps a tobacco pouch, embroidered slippers, or a new pocket watch. Women may receive an apron, a silk or paper fan, jewelry, a hair comb, or things for sewing like a pincushion or thimble. Children would receive gifts such as hair ribbons, drawing pencils, dresses, dolls, reading books, sleds, skates, toy animals or trains, and maybe, if they were lucky, even a pet canary. So what we've done here is decorate a modern Christmas tree to look like it was decorated in the classic Victorian tradition. Now, you'll notice that this tree is actually artificial. So, of course, in the late 1800s, people would have used an actual real tree that they would have potentially cut down themselves and brought into their home. You'll notice as well that the tree has some electric lights. Now, electric lights were not available for Victorian people's Christmas trees. This is definitely a modern addition. What they would do instead was include little wax candles at the end of the branches so that if they would like their tree lit up at night, they would just light the candles. We don't do that nowadays typically because of course it is somewhat of a fire hazard. So let's have a closer look at how the Victorians would have traditionally decorated their Christmas trees in their homes. So as I discussed before, the Victorians used things like fruits, nuts, and candy to decorate their Christmas trees. They had to be quite crafty because what they had available to them was different than what we have today. They didn't have factories to create ornaments that they could easily buy. So they would dry out fruits such as this orange slice here, and they would dry out other things like lemon slices, or they would maybe include cranberries on their trees. Victorians used a lot of natural elements, and they would use food, sometimes nuts and things like that, that they would actually eat right from their tree, including homemade cookies. Moving up the tree, you'll notice that there is some popcorn. So popcorn garlands were quite popular in the Victorian era. You can see here that it's simply pieces of popcorn that have been placed along a piece of string. So children and their mothers would work on this and place it on their tree. These are just some of the examples of some of the innovative ways Victorians would use things they could find in their home, like food, things in their kitchen, that sort of thing. Now, they would also, as I said before, use things like nuts or pine cones. So you can see here that we have some gilded pine cones on the tree. These were very popular on the Christmas trees of the late 1800s. Now, gilded means covered in gold, and you can see this one's colored in silver here. So what they would do is gather up walnuts or pine cones, that sort of thing, and they would cover them in gold or silver paint. Now, paint was quite expensive, so your average family likely was not doing this. They may just use roasted walnuts or pine cones instead. But the wealthier families could afford to use some paint and add these pretty fancy looking pine cones or walnuts to their trees. Sometimes they would gild walnuts that were roasted and eat them. Now, of course, that's not recommended nowadays as paint can be toxic. Another element of our tree that you'll see here is this tinfoil garland, and it's wrapped all throughout the tree. So the Victorians would use things that they had kind of left over in their homes. So certain foods like were wrapped in tinfoil, like cheese, candies, tobacco packages had tinfoil wrapping inside. So children would ask their parents if they could keep this tinfoil, and they would actually store it up for the rest of the year in anticipation of using it for Christmas decorations. They would simply cut strips of the tinfoil and create these garlands that they would then use on their tree. And it added a nice silvery sheen and kind of fancied up their tree. You'll notice a trend here that a lot of the ornaments and the materials they used were cheap and easy to find. It wasn't until the very much later in the 1800s and early 1900s that ornaments began to be produced in factories and sent across Europe and North America from Germany. Something else you'll notice in a Victorian Christmas tree is that the presents are placed right in the tree. So as I talked about a little bit before, Presents were traditionally stored in the tree as a part of the decoration instead of under the tree. This tradition changed eventually to what we're used to today. But when you were opening your presents, you would actually reach in and you would pull out your present right from the Christmas tree. Now, the presents were usually wrapped in some kind of pattern paper, similar to what we have today, but to start off with, they used something more like a plain brown paper, perhaps newspaper, that sort of thing. Printed paper would have been quite expensive, so families with a little bit less money would have definitely had the brown, thicker paper, perhaps colored tissue paper instead of fancier, more expensive printed paper. Now moving up the tree, we'll see a glass ornament here. So trees that were decorated in the late 1800s, Victorian era around there, mid-1800s, usually had a lot of natural and easy to find materials on it, as I said before, with the tin foil and the food and that sort of thing. Having a glass ornament, a wooden ornament, or a tin ornament would have been very special, as they were quite expensive. Today we have a lot of our ornaments mass-produced in factories, which they did not have in that time period. So giving someone a glass ornament for the tree would have been a very special gift. If you were lucky and you had a husband or someone else in your family who was good with woodworking, they could maybe make some wooden ornaments, or perhaps they could make tin ornaments in their shop for your tree. But glass ornaments were extra special. Eventually, when the German factories that produced glass ornaments and that sort of thing were kind of mass producing the ornaments later in the earlier 1900s and further into the 20th century, it became easier to buy glass ornaments for your tree. Now, the spotlight is usually on the tree topper on a tree. So Victorian tree toppers wouldn't have looked exactly like this, but they would have been somewhat similar. So they would often use gold wire, or as you can see, there's little faux pearls on this one. Now, depending on the family, if the family did not have a lot of money, they may not be able to actually afford a tree topper. So they might just put a gift at the top of the tree or something like that. If they had a way of making a wooden tree topper, they may make a wooden star or something along those lines. If you were a wealthier Victorian family, you could buy an expensive tree topper that was usually made by a company in Germany, and you'd have it shipped to wherever you were living in Europe or North America. So those were the ones that were usually made of gold wire. They were usually quite elaborate and very tall, and they often had a picture on them of an angel or something along those lines for Christmas and the connection to Christianity with Christmas as well. So this is just kind of our replica of the traditional Victorian Christmas tree. Sometimes they would have used other things like candy garlands and that sort of thing. Some similarities you may notice compared to our trees today are the colors that we use. So we use silver and gold, just like they did as well, but we typically do not use food on our Christmas trees today. So that concludes our tour of the traditional Christmas tree ornamentation that the Victorians would do. Thank you for joining me.